Hey everybody, welcome back to the One Step Better podcast. I am Mike and this is Matt.
What's up, Mike? How you doing today, man?
Doing well, man. Welcome back from Thanksgiving. Fun
out.
week of being off and enjoying good food and football and family, the three important F's of Thanksgiving. So
Go
welcome back.
Noles.
Go Noles, yeah.
12-0.
Great victory over Florida.
Always good to beat Florida.
Yeah, hopefully they'll have a spot in the playoffs. We'll see. We'll see.
Got Louisville this week.
Yeah.
We'll find out.
And Louisville's going to be probably a little bit frustrated coming off a loss to Kentucky.
Yeah.
You can join us on our football podcast for more details. Great week. I'm glad to have everybody back and listening. Today, we're going to talk about 2024, which is crazy to think about because it's still November, but that's just right around the corner.
It's time to plan. It's time to figure it out.
This is the One Step Better podcast. Helping small businesses make wins each and every week. Budgeting, all things budgeting, was one of the first things that we want to really think about or think through and talk through as we start to turn the calendar into a brand new year. Budget is super important. It sets really a groundwork, some framework, and expectations for the new year. So, Matt, when you started to work on your 2024 budget, when did that happen? When did you begin that process?
We started groundwork on the budget really in early October, starting to lay down our goals for next year. I want to understand what our goals were first. What was our growth goals? What was our staffing goals? What changes we need to make going forward in the new year? Been looking at our big 3-year and 10-year goals and make sure we're still on track for those. But it really started for me with goal setting, making sure we're on track for the goals we had, and then tying that into how does that really get, pen to paper. So figure out our goals, and then, if I was going to assume this growth goal and our growth goal next year is 20%, how am I going to get there? What's that look like? And then what's our budget have to be to get there?
Why do you do a budget?
I want to lay a framework and parameters or guide rails around spending, obviously first spending, but also making sure it's more of a projection or a forecast for me to make sure okay, this is what we're anticipating. What are the parameters I should have in mind? So I think I started with revenue, with very, very easy place to start. If we sell at this volume, like we're anticipating our goals, this is our guardrails. Then I went right to labor and then our tech and then sales and marketing tied to that.
Do you treat a business budget? I think about my home, my personal budget. We have dollars coming in.
Every
the bank
dollar
account.
gets allocated.
Yeah,
in the home budget.
It's pretty pretty predictable. It doesn't go crazy too often. But it is for me, it's important. I want every dollar to have a name before it comes into the bank account. That way we kind of know what to expect. We're setting some guardrails in different categories, whether it's, I'm saving towards, maybe we want to go on a vacation next year, or a big vacation next year, maybe a smaller vacation this year. And so you start to put dollars in those little buckets in order to build up for that. Do you treat a business budget similar to that, or is it a little bit different? How does that?
It's a little different. Ideally, it would be similar, right? And if it was as predictable as a home budget, I think can be, it would be more every dollar is allocated. A business budget to me is more if things go as intended, because revenue's not predictable. Somebody leaves, you have some new opportunity like that. It's too unpredictable to think that way. It's set in stone. I do think you have some tendencies though, one of the things we have to do is create a capital expenditure reserve, or, hey, we have to put money aside in a savings plan for taxes, or what, so we do have dollars allocated that way, but not to the point where I know for sure February's going to look like this. Yeah. I don't know what February's going to look like right now. I have a prediction of what it looks like, so I have to have a little bit more variable to it.
I would imagine you have pretty good information to be able to make that prediction based on past performance and
correct. Yeah, absolutely.
Trends of growth, that type of stuff.
For sure, you do, but things change, and it's not always, timing is different sometimes, and when you hire somebody, you may try to get somebody hired in March, but you don't get them hired till May, or you may find somebody in February and get them hired. There's a little bit more unpredictableness to it. I do feel like we basically start with trend, right? So what's our last, in our world, because of how our revenue kind of grows month to month, I really look at my last 3 or 4 months of the year to predict my next year. And then I also know, historically, we know we have tax season and we have January revenue that comes in, and we have different times or seasonality of our year when people we have more spikes in sales than other. But I kind of go line by line and just think through what are how do I analyze the trend for that line item? So if it's labor, I'm going to hire somebody in first quarter for sales. Well, we're going to start that process now. I will predict they're going to come in March, but it may be April, it could be February. So I just kind of go line by line and kind of think through what that line looks like.
You mentioned that your starting point, if you're just sitting down to let's start from something, it is you're always starting with revenue.
I generally start with revenue because I would have a goal of what we'd like revenue to be, because everything kind of falls off of that. So I know that I want my labor percentage to be, in our world, it's under 40%, but whatever your industry is, I would have it starts with a percentage of top line. The second piece of that is really my profit. So I want to have X amount of profit, and I have to work up towards that. So if that means I want to make 20% profit or 25% profit, I have to know what my parameters are for the top and the bottom, and that lets me know what I have in the middle to work with.
And then from there, it's just a matter of allocating those spending dollars towards whatever it is that I need to support that revenue to achieve my goals.
Correct.
So you're nesting that. Let's say, and let's use a hypothetical example. Let's say I'm $1 million business, top line revenue business. I'm trying to get 20% to the bottom. So I want to carry home 200K. Let's just use that as an example. That budget for 2024 is going to be nested within maybe my 10-year goal, my 5-year goal, my 3-year goal that you're backing out into. I know long-term I want to be wherever I want to be, but next year I need to hit these numbers to achieve that.
Correct. Yeah. So we have a revenue goal trend for the next 10 years of where we'd like to be. And we have a 3-year, I think, is more concrete goal, like we're going to get here. And so I want to basically make sure we stay on that trend of our goal. And we'll keep that 3-year goal rolling. But, as long as we hit the numbers we expect to this year, we're on track for the 3-year goal we had at the start of this year. And so that's kind of where I start. You can't form a budget without knowing where you're trying to go, right? So it starts with goals. That's why I said it starts with goals. It always is my starting point of, okay, if I wanted to stay at 5% profit, or if I wanted to just remain flat, which I wouldn't want to do, but like if that was my goal, obviously I know my budget based on that. And maybe it'd be like, I expect my revenue to be flat, but if I can squeeze, my technology spend, or I can, find some efficiencies in our overhead, or find some efficiencies in our variable costs. So in our case, labor, then I would be trying to back into how do I improve profit from that?
Because really if I know my top line number, I know what I'm trying to accomplish as a business owner, whatever that profit is in specific industries. Everything else is just, we're going to put the dollars in whatever bucket.
Correct. It tells me what my buckets are. I know in our world, buckets are labor, technology, overhead, sales and marketing, and then we have our capital expenditure budget.
How often over the course of the year are you
I try not to adjust my budget.
Really?
I try not to, because if I'm off, I want to know what my real. I may have like a version 1 that I never change. I may have a duplicate of one, and I'll have
that's based on
reality. But let's say we had COVID a couple years ago.
Yeah.
Budget changed dramatically.
Yeah.
And so we had to figure out, okay, this was the original plan, but here's the new plan. What's that look like? So we'll have a revision of that. I won't edit my original budget. I want to know what my original plan was.
Are you always looking at 12 months?
I'm always looking at 12-month trend. Yeah, always. And I always really look at, 1 month being off budget's not a big deal. So I kind of look at stuff I say at this point, kind of quarterly, because some month it may not hit, but, we look at, I look at an annualized budget on how much are we on track to hit budget at any one time. This year, we're like 102% of budget. So it means I did a pretty good job predicting where we'd be. We're a little better than that, which is always good. We had some areas that were not as good as I was hoping. We spent some money that we shouldn't have, but we ended up making money somewhere else. So that's some of the unpredictability of it. But I over the last 10 years, I've probably done a decent job of predicting budget more times than not, unless the world ends like 2020.
Yeah. Well, in an industry like ours, or at least a business model like ours, it's a little bit more predictable.
It's easy to predict, right? And we have a fixed revenue model. Our labor is pretty steady. We know what our people produce. The only thing that really ever affects my budget is if we make a hire that doesn't work out, that's expensive. And we find that out in our budget really quick. If we overhire or revenue doesn't hit in the right timeline, once again, our labor percentage will get off. Sales and marketing is probably the most unpredictable because we tried a bunch of different things and some of those work and some of those don't. So that's kind of where that whole budget really matters. Like, hey, we're on track to do things so we can, or we're ahead so we can spend a little extra money, or we're not where we want to be. So we have to look and see how we tighten up the budget from there.
Got questions about how to run your business better? Join Whirks and Patrick Accounting for office hours. Every month on Thursdays, several of our staff host open discussion Zoom meetings to share tips on business best practices, as well as answer any questions you have about their topic. We talk about QuickBooks tips and tricks, how to understand your insurance policies, employee onboarding, and the list goes on and on and on. Don't miss your opportunity to engage in the conversation and come away with some business tips. Register today at whirks.com/office hours. That's WHIRKS.com/office hours. Can't wait to see you there.
Budgeting is one of those things, though, that I think scares a lot of business owners because they think of it as constraints. And I think it is, I don't think of it as a constraint. I think of it as a roadmap. Mm-hmm. A home budget, I think, can be restrictive because it shouldn't be restrictive, but it's about making sure you know where all the dollars go. Your business budget is a little more fluid than that, and you're not going to get it right the first time. The first time you do a budget, if you hit 80%, you've probably done really, really good to kind of understand, unless your business does have some fixed recurring trends that are easy to predict. There's a lot of businesses that aren't, though. So
I think of a budget as it really just gives a peace of mind and freedom. I've never seen a budget as restrictive, mainly because I'm the one that gets to set budget, right? And so if there's something that's restrictive, I'm just going to change that to whatever I want it to be. But especially whenever, our organization has grown substantially, we're right at 40 employees now, and having a budget that's a little bit shared by our leadership team and kind of more people know what's involved, that also gives the freedom to be able to say, all right, hey, you know what? I know that we had, make up something, $10,000 budgeted towards event ABC. Well, if I get a bill for $300, okay, yeah, I can make a decision on that thing because that's within my budget.
correct.
And so it helps give freedom, the guardrails for the team to be able to make those decisions within the scope of what we're trying to accomplish as a whole. It also helps mentally avoid some of the, we spend a substantial amount of money on food here, whether it's snacks, Cokes, water, going out to eat, or whatever it is, a substantial amount of money on it. But when you look at it in the budget as a percentage of revenue, or relative to everything else, it's
1% of revenue.
It's not as big of a deal.
Yeah, right now I tell you what, it's exactly 1% of revenue. I looked at it pretty hard recently.
But
I was like, wow, that's a lot of money. Well, it's not really.
Yeah.
I mean, but we have 40 people. It ends up averaging about $1,000 a head a year.
Yeah, and it's for some people that's like, well, I would never do that, and that's perfectly fine. But that's to some extent strategic decision to spend money there for culture building, team development, all the things. There's a lot of lunch and learns that are happening in that. It's not just food. But it's a decision that can be made because, hey, you know what? We have a line item that we're tracking that we're saying that we're going to spend X amount of dollars next year on this thing. I now have the freedom and flexibility to say, all right, team, we're going to go out and do this thing, and it's going to cost.
We're going to have a birthday lunch, or we're going to have an event in the office for, wrapping party or whatever it is. I want our team to come together to build rapport. That's money I think is well spent. And so it is something, though, that does create freedom. I think it creates freedom to know that you're doing the right things.
I like that. I think that's helpful. I do think that some business owners struggle with that because they see their budget as a straitjacket to some extent, even if they're the ones creating it. All right, I said that I'm going to spend X amount of dollars on, paper, whatever it is. And I got, I undershot that. Maybe I don't need to buy paper the rest of the year.
I will say this, we're over budget on office supplies this year by $35,000. And I was like, wow, maybe we should tighten that one up a little bit next year.
Yeah, maybe we should tighten that up, or maybe
actually I need to figure out, I want to know if we have some Amazon personal purchases that are in there on my account, but I'm just saying there may be some stuff in there that I shouldn't have bought.
Yeah, you got to take the kids Amazon access.
I got to make sure I access it for my kids. Amazon is off that, but
But it can be. I get where it can feel restrictive. It shouldn't be, though. It shouldn't be.
It is. As an owner, though, allowing my leadership to have control over their own budgets, I had to have some trust there.
Sure.
Because I'm letting other people, in theory, in my mind, still spend my money.
Yep.
And to the extent that I'm not okay with that, I have to make sure I'm really clear with what is and inside of the rules and what we
Yep.
want. And that is just, hey, here's what I expect you guys to stay inside these lines, and I'm okay with that. It's when, well, I'm going to test this thing and that thing. I'm like, well, what pile of money are you pulling that out of? Because that we don't have that anywhere in our budget line item.
Yeah.
And so that kind of stuff gets a little unpredictable for me. I need to do a better job of creating the buckets of freedom as well, because if I don't, then I have some control problems.
Well, that's tough also because you know that people are going to spend money on things that you would never spend money on.
Correct.
Whether that's they just made a bad decision that you probably
I don't
would,
really,
like, I
100%.
know that's a bad decision, but I kind of have to let them fail sometimes. But that's real dollars that is at play.
That hits my pocket.
Yeah.
Like when we spend that money, like, are you coming out of your salary or my salary? Because I think it's coming out of my salary again, and it always seems to do that. So just make sure we're all clear about what's going on here.
Yeah, but it does. It gives your team the freedom to be able to make those decisions. And in a significantly larger organization, everything is really managed off of budget for leadership teams, because it's, hey, this is what we said we're going to do here. I need you to beat your top line and reduce your bottom line stuff or your expenses in order to hit those targets. And everything's really managed off of that to some extent. Small businesses are a little bit different. I think there's a little bit more flexibility that needs to be there, especially if you haven't done a budget. Your first one is going to suck. You're going to get things wrong. I think it's smart to do a 12-month budget. But I think realistically, that 3 to 6 months, that should be pretty tight. Your 3-month budget, you should be able to forecast that pretty tightly.
For sure.
Your 6 months is going to be a little bit looser. Your 12 months is going to be a little bit looser.
But
it is the guardrails.
You asked the question. I will say this. Early on when I did budgeting, I would get it wrong so quickly in the front end, I had to redo it. And so I'd have 4 or 5 versions over the course of a year. And that's perfectly fine. Your goal is to predict and forecast where you're going. The reality of it is most of our clients anyway don't understand their numbers well enough to even do a budget. So it starts with them being educated on what's their drivers of profitability, what are the really things that are controllable, what are things that are not controllable, how predictable can you make revenue, how predictable can you make labor, how predictable can you make your inventory management costs if you're a product business. And so it really is educational along the way to see where your money's going. And that's the same reason why you have a home budget is, man, I didn't realize we were eating out that much. Look, we're spending X dollars a month eating out. Maybe we should look and see if that makes sense.
Yeah, we've had that conversation multiple times.
I know we don't have it enough, as I tell you that. We should have it more, but we don't. But yeah, I mean, so, when I look at like drivers and the levers we can pull to improve profitability, it starts with understanding your numbers. And then from there, what are the drivers of profitability? How can I find another 5 or 10%? How can I get from, if I'm at 20% profitable to 25% profitable? Those are some levers I can pull. Is it pricing? Is it labor costs? Is it efficiency of our overhead? How good a job are we using the dollars we already have in the door to make sure we're hitting our goals of profitability? And it starts with actually putting some parameters where that should be.
You mentioned that it's not uncommon for you to maybe create more than one budget. Are you looking at, all right, this is what I think is going to happen, and then I'm going to create version 2 that's like, all right, this is kind of maybe a worst case scenario, or if things start to go south to some extent, and then
I don't do that version 1.
Okay.
Right? I don't do a best, worst. And you probably could do that. If I was doing like a 5-year pro forma with a brand new business, I would definitely have 3 versions, best, worst, and what I expect. But a budget at this point is I want it to be a forecast of where we're really going to be. So I only have that one main version. If things dramatically are different, let's say we miss revenue by 30% in the first quarter. Well, obviously my budget has to change. My forecast has to change. Either is it going to be recovered? Is it not going to be recovered? Do I have to make changes on our spending because of where we are against budget? So I want to know that.
And to some extent, a change that big there's going to be further conversations around how in the world did this ever happen.
Correct. But like, hey, we expected this deal that we already had in place to renew, and they didn't renew, and it was a huge deal. Well, that's a big deal. Like those are altering of budget dramatically. And so that does mean like I have to look at all my costs. It could be, hey, we have a labor overstaffing, we have a technology overspend, we have, what can we do to match the percentage that we wanted to be at? So if 30% of revenue is down, that means 30% of everything else has to go down.
Yeah.
It just does. And so actually maybe more than that.
Yeah.
Because, you can't fix everything with just cutting.
That's the way math works.
Yeah, it doesn't always work that way.
Yeah.
So it is something to predictable. I think, one of the common things that we see that clients don't do a good job enough on is having a conservative mindset in their budget, but also making sure that they have the rhythms and the controls in place to be putting the money aside they need to, be it taxes, be it, long-term capital expenditures. If you're a business that have a lot of vehicles, you have to have a plan for replacement, technology replacement, hardware, space, all those things. And so they don't think long-term enough about putting money aside in the budget for that stuff in the future they're going to have to spend. So as you're doing this, it's important to be thinking through both short and long-term, but also like actual cash management is part of this process. So, how are you going to put money aside for taxes? Because you're going to have taxes due every quarter or through your withholding or corporate taxes, depending on what you have there. And, putting the rhythms in place to make sure that you've set aside the cash you need to have when you need it.
How long does it take you to like, if you're going to knock out budget?
Start to finish?
Yeah.
Realistically, a couple weeks. Because like I said, the first thing I do is I want to know where my goals are. That's my step one. And then step two, I start to analyze line by line. I get my leadership involved. So like I had a leadership meeting. I had a budget meeting with Shelby already on our sales team. What is her expectations of growth, what she thinks she needs as far as team, what she wants to spend technology-wise, what she wants to try in 24, what events they're going to go to, all that stuff. And that allows me to create some framework of, that's her budget. It doesn't match mine, or it does match mine. And if it doesn't match, I have to have a compromise on what that means.
Yeah, we got to figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But at 2 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, realistically, I'll start this process early October. Holidays and stuff mess it up. I probably am more like 5-6 weeks by the time it's all finished, but I'm a little slow.
I don't know.
It's a lot of work. I like doing the budget because it does also lets me I scrub our numbers for this year along that process. So I'm like, why do we have 17 LinkedIn subscriptions when we only have 5 people on sales? That's something we should probably cut. I found a couple recurring subscriptions last night. Actually, I was looking at this. I've sent some emails this morning going, I don't think that's something we have anymore. Yeah. So we're paying for some stuff that we're not using.
I think that's a good point. It is a way to keep your pulse on
month to
your
month,
business.
I'm not analyzing every dollar. I'm just not. I'm looking at big picture, what the net looks like, what our trends look like, but I'm not getting to the nitty gritty every month like I probably should.
It also allows you to revisit goals.
Yeah.
Because I think that's a great point that, your budget is starting with where am I trying to get long-term and then breaking that into smaller, more manageable pieces. And it's an opportunity to sit down and think, is that really still where I want to go? Or maybe that needs to change and I need to do something different. I think that's a wise thing to do. Yeah.
I mean, when you go about trying to build your budget, having a good expectation of where you're trying to go both 1 year, 3 year, 10 years out is super important. Your budget and your dollars will dictate, your ability to hit your goals. And so if you're not hitting your goals, it's probably because you didn't predict well enough, but also because you didn't have a clear picture of how you're going to get there.
Yeah. And you got to be able to look in the mirror and say, where was I off?
I messed that up.
Matt, any last thoughts as we wrap this up?
We do have the workshop coming up tomorrow. If you want some help building a budget, we're happy to help. Obviously, that's going to be recorded. So if you can attend, I'd recommend watching. We're going to have some best practices on how to build your budget, the steps to go about that. And I know you're going to give some more details on how to get it.
So on November 30th at noon, 12 o'clock Central Time, we're going to have a workshop. This isn't a webinar. This isn't a presentation. This is a workshop where we're going to help small businesses build their budget, give them some practical tips and guidelines to make that easy. You can get more information about that at patrickaccounting.com/events. It's going to be recorded. If you want to go back and watch it later, you can always reach out to us at onestepbetter@whirks.com, and we'll give you that recording, and you can knock it out. Budget is super, super, super important. Build the guardrails that you're going to help run your organization for the entire 2024 calendar year.
Yep. Got to have a plan in order to hit the plan.
Yep, absolutely. Matt, thanks for jumping on. For all you listening, I really appreciate it. If you need anything from us, reach out to us. We'll be glad to help. Otherwise, we will see you next week. Have a great day. Thanks for listening to the One Step Better podcast. I'd really appreciate it if you would take some time to rate us 5 stars on your podcast player of choice and make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you never miss out on another episode. Thanks and have a great day.